everybody, and welcome back to A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. By the time you guys are listening to this, I will be married already, and we are kind of just putting in a bonus episode here because we really want to continue putting out content for you guys during this time. And so, to bring that content to us today, we have a special guest. We have Patrick O'Hearn. You guys heard him on the podcast a little bit earlier, and we talked about his Our Lady of Sorrows book. So today he's on to talk about the courtship of the saints, how the saints met their spouses. Welcome, Patrick.
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Amber.
Of course. When you sent me this book, we've been trying to do this podcast forever and they just couldn't get the book to me. And finally, we got it. And I'm so excited to kind of dive into this because I'm going to be honest, Patrick, I get so many emails about the nightmare that is dating right now, whether it's secular or Catholic or whatever. People have been emailing me and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, this needs a podcast episode.
Yeah, definitely. I see, I'm speaking next month in June at this Catholic retreat center in New York to bring singles together. And when I speak throughout different parishes, I just see this longing for, especially these women. It's like they've been waiting for years to meet a godly man. And it's easier for us men because, we can deal with the rejection. It's still painful, but it's like we are the initiators. And I think for a lot of women just waiting and then they get pursued by godless men. And even I've heard horror stories, even with, I know a lot of people that have met their spouse on Catholic Match, but I've heard horror stories where guys, obviously just looking for sex on there. And so it's just, it's brutal. And so that's why I wanted this book. And I wrote these different stories and, some of them didn't live the most pure courtships. There's others that did, and the whole spectrum. But I think it just gives, hopefully at the end of the day, like you get a lot of hope from reading these saints. Like God has a plan and he cares more about your vocation than you do. So
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think especially when we look at the big cities like Chicago, New York, all these places, there is an influx of Catholics, like so many Catholics in those big cities. You never think of it because Chicago's so liberal here and New York is New York. So you wouldn't think about it, but there are good traditional Catholics out there in those areas. And sometimes we just need a little gathering or a little group to kind of bring those people together in order to find them because our world is so big, although sometimes it's very small in a lot of ways. But I think a lot of the times people just have a hard time meeting people just in general, like in their everyday life, because they go to work, they're around secular people. They go to a coffee shop, they're around secular people. And it's not like Catholics are very bold these days either. It's not like you can just pick one out of a crowd unless it's Ash Wednesday. So it's kind of interesting, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into this. Before we get started, what can the readers kind of expect from this book in just an overview, kind of general idea?
Yep. So I start the book. Obviously, I have a preface for like how I met my wife, and originally I had this book. I was going to have modern day couples. I would half of the book, and then Tan decided let's stick with the saints. So anyways, I had to cut out half of my book, and then I found more saints. The saints always choose me, but I do have one modern day couple that was introduced by Padre Pio. So I thought that was important so I begin with chapter 1, which I define what courtship is. How is that different from dating, and where did that evolve from? Where's the term courtship itself? And then I go into chapter 2 is like biblical courtship. So I want to show like, how is this biblically based? Courtship goes back, even before the time of Christ. And then I have these different chapters. And so within these chapters, I break down stories of different saints. So royal courtship is one with, Elizabeth of Hungary and Louis IV. And then I have some saints called religious life after marriage, those who became nuns after their spouse died away. And then I play on the third ring of marriage, which I don't know if you know, Amber, what the third ring of marriage is. Do you know?
Is that kind of like it takes 3 to get married?
Actually, I think it was maybe a joke that Fulton Sheen talked. You have the engagement, you have the marriage ring, the wedding ring, right? And then the third ring is suffering. Get it? Suffering.
Oh,
And
yes.
so it's kind of, and so I kind of have some stories in there to show like, that marriage is tough. It's, and I have a quote in there, God gave it to me, but just says marriage is the cross and the cross is marriage. And you can you could unpack that. But then I also have a chapter on courtships to produce saints. some saints that were martyred. That's a whole chapter. And then courtships that transformed the church, saintly matchmakers. You have the story with Padre Pio in there. And then I have just a couple modern day couples. So it kind of is broken up into each of those chapters. And you'll find it's basically to tell stories of how these saints met their spouses, how they persevered in times of, to live out chastity and purity. And then the second part of it, just different counsels, like how to choose a spouse. And for those discerning marriage, I have some advice for married couples. And then I have some prayers in the back, some really powerful prayers. A prayer to St. Raphael, who's the patron of finding your spouse. I highly recommend praying to him. And then just some questions to ask yourself as you're discerning marriage.
That's wonderful. And I think a lot of people, especially these days, they just don't know where to start with dating. They see what their friends have gone through. I heard horror stories from my friends, and I went through some extreme horror stories myself, an extremely physical abusive relationship from a guy who was Catholic. And so being in this world of dating, it can really be hit or miss. So it's great to have examples from the saints and examples from just the Bible in general. Ruth and Boaz are personally one of my favorites. And Our Lady and Saint Joseph. I mean, they were probably one of the most prominent couples, obviously, because, they're the parents of Jesus. But one thing that I always really loved about Saint Joseph and Our Lady, they don't really talk about this, but some apologists and some theologians have kind of talked about this a little bit, where when Our Lady was on her way to go visit Elizabeth, Saint Joseph would have accompanied her for that week or that
Mhm.
3-day walk, however long it took to get there. He would have dropped her off and then he would have walked back by himself and then came back and got her a few months later, whenever, probably like 3 months later. So it's very interesting to see how courting has changed, obviously, a lot. But before we kind of jump into the whole dating nightmare stuff, could you explain the difference between courtship and dating for those who are unfamiliar with the terms?
Yeah, I think for one, courtship is, it goes back to our tradition, to the time of, even before Christ. And so it's biblically based. And then the actual term itself was kind of introduced around, I think, 1570s, and it meant a courtier, which is an advisor to a king or queen. And then it kind of developed into this notion. So that obviously that advisor kind of would play into the role, I think, of, as we see as courtship developed, it involves, like, your whole family. Like you bring your potential spouse to your mom and dad, to your father. And so, like, in a sense, like, your family is kind of like this advisor to you. They're looking at, like, and then it came down to the notion that we know today is, like, the whole idea that the purpose of wooing someone for the purpose of marriage. So it has marriage always in the back of its front and center. And then through the writings of the saints and Father Rippinger, who I quote throughout, it's that, the principal question is, does this person have virtue? That's like, and will this person lead me to heaven? And so that's always been, I think, the fundamental question. And then dating is it's more of a recent fad in the 20th century. And I think actually it was derived as a lower class slang term, and they came out of, I think it was this reporter in Chicago, they coined the term dating. And with the advances of the automobile, so the primary and other differences, I think, dating tends to be more externals. It's like, does this person, what kind of money does this person have? Like, do we share the same interests? And I mean, they're good questions, same interests, but it's really focused on the present. And while courting is focused on, I would say, eternity and heaven, and goes beyond the externals to look into someone's soul. Fulton Sheen said, like, a strength in a man and beauty in a woman, they're like the icing on the cake. And I think the dating culture, goes straight for, the icing is everything. Even men, it's like, what does this girl look like? And I
Mhm.
think, and I don't know the quote, I should have put it in here, but I remember Father Rippinger was saying, it's like, I don't care, how ugly the woman is. You can put a bag on her head as long as she has virtue, but you should be attracted to your spouse. It's important, but it's not the end all of marriage, like. And so I think that's the separation. Is dating, we've seen, is about pleasure. It's like, what can I get out of this person, even on that first date? And well, courtship is like, no, I'm going to save myself and I'm going to help you get to heaven. And ultimately, too, another thing is, I consider courtship almost in a sense like religious life. You go to a community, right? You're discerning, and that community is going to help you like decide, maybe it's the vocations director, the mother superior is going to say to you, you know what, we don't feel like you have a calling here. It goes both ways. And I think in courtship, that's why you involve your mom and dad. Like you have your father and your siblings meet this person, and you're saying like, is this person really, are they a holy person? But, often in dating, it's like, you end up meeting that person, like, maybe your dad meets him like maybe a couple hours before the wedding. I mean, that's an extreme, but like often it's like after you're
It
engaged, it's
happens.
like, yeah, yeah. And so it's like, I think that those are some really serious, as you see the differences between the two, serious differences between.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I definitely think too with the whole how they look and stuff, I think attraction can come later. Like you don't necessarily have to automatically be like, "Oh my goodness, he's drop dead handsome or drop dead
Yeah.
gorgeous." I was lucky I had that. But a lot of people don't. And then over time though, they kind of gain a love for this person and then the attraction follows after that. And that's something that people don't really realize either is that attraction doesn't always have to be the first thing that happens. It's not like love at first sight. I mean, there are times where I've had friends who were like, I don't know, he looks kind of weird. But our culture is constantly based off of these dating apps that are based off of how people look. And then you first see a picture of them, you swipe right or left, and then it gives you an idea of who they are. And it's so backwards because really, in order to love someone properly, we need to get to know them first. And like, how can you love God if you don't know him? Wasn't that St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine who basically said that? To know God is to love him or something. The point is that a lot of the times our culture views dating as very shallow.
Yeah.
It's very selfish. It's like what I want, what instead of the natural way it was supposed to be, which is back in the day you used to meet someone from your town or your neighborhood, but now everyone's moving out. Everybody's spread across the United States. Everybody's kind of mixed in there and it's really hard to find a spouse. But dating culture today is awful, secular or Catholic actually. What do you think about the dating culture and what's going on right now?
No, it is, and you had a point. Actually, if I was smart with apps, like I told my wife, I'd be a millionaire because I'm not. But but it was I would love to create like an app on Catholic colleges where you don't even see what that person looks like. So you have a compatibility thing. You just enter in all these things like who's
Mm,
your favorite saint, like all these things, your temperament, and then it spits out three people. And it's like you don't even. But then you have their names, and then you go meet them in person. I think it'd be brilliant, just because it's like you're getting to that virtue first. So, but going back to your question is, like, no, I think the whole, the dating culture, it's totally reversed. It's like it's jaded because it's all about, like I said, like exteriors, and you don't even give someone a chance. And it's like maybe that, and in this book, there's only like a couple instances where it's like actually love at first sight. The rest of them, even Saint Gianna and her husband, like they had seen each other a couple times and it was quick glances, but it wasn't until, after St. Gianna did this novena to Our Lady and they were at a priest's first mass that they really fell in love for the first time. So
mm,
I really encourage people to like, to challenge themselves to not fall in that lie that it's love at first sight, and even patience. It's a great virtue. And nowadays it's like you see so many women that are pursuing the man, and like with that song, like here's my number, call me maybe. Yeah. And it's like, no, like you need to, like what would Our Lady and what do you think the saints like, they want the man to pursue you. There's ways you can smile at a guy if you like him. I mean, it's not like, but I think there's just this element of we want it now, and so we're willing to even sacrifice our chastity for this, or even the way we dress. It's like, women will go out nowadays and it's like just show off everything, and it's like, wow, if you had modesty, I think a virtuous man, I mean, I was drawn to my wife's modesty. If she had been like, showing off everything, I probably would say no to her. And so I
mhm.
think that these are like things that I think it's hard for women especially to process, like, oh, like you think the opposite, like, oh, I show off my body. No, like you're going to get the wrong type of guy.
Exactly. And I think especially with that these days, women will say like, "Oh, I'm just dressing like this for myself because," but the way you dress for yourself also just happens to be the way that men get it, the bad kind of men get attracted to you. And then people are always complaining about their boyfriends, about how like they're constantly sexually driven, this and that and that. And and I tell them, I'm like, well, if you're complaining so much, why are you dating him? It's like this isn't a permanent thing. Dating is
Yeah.
not marriage. Too many people treat dating as though it's a type of marriage. And then that's when you become the forever girlfriend, the forever boyfriend, and you move in together and you guys have a dog, but there's no real commitment. And then people are like, "Oh, well, divorce is like so crazy these days, and so marriage isn't worth it because no fault divorce." I'm like, "Yeah, but then why are you marrying somebody you don't trust? Why is divorce already on the table before you even get married? If the girl or the boy you're marrying is like, "Oh, if it doesn't work out, then like we'll get a no fault divorce," or if you're afraid of that, why would you ever propose? You know what I mean?
No, I do. I just, I think everything that, again, the culture we find ourselves, this divorce culture, I was trying to look at what are the solutions, what's causing this. And I really do think it is at the heart of it is dating. It's like, it's like, how far can I go? And that's why in this book, I wanted to put these 4 stages of Father Rippinger. And as we were talking about before this show, it's like, they're challenging. I mean,
Mm,
and I do want to throw in, as we were talking about it, like these cause for prudence, because Father Rippinger says like you shouldn't be alone with someone, and some people in their like the 30s or 40s would be like, wow, that's crazy. I mean, that's
yeah.
crazy, like, and so I think you have to use your best judgment, the in your prudence. But I would rather have, like that sacrifice. I think about a nun too. She's waiting 10 years for final vows. A priest in the seminary is 8 years. And as you know, like as you're getting ready to get married, it's like it's a short period.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, oh, like I can't like make out with this person. And like you're
Yep.
telling, it's like you're gonna have your lifetime, for that. And I think that there's just, it's like we want the pleasure now. We don't want to sacrifice. And I really think that by living a holy courtship, you will set yourself up for a holy marriage. Because even at the end of the day, it's not, even in marriage, it's like people think like like the marital act is so important, but it's not the end all of the marriage. It's, and I think sometimes that's where the dating puts that like as the end all be all, but it's no, I mean, and so I think these little sacrifices we make now, they set ourselves up for a lifetime of happiness with our spouse.
Absolutely. And I definitely think a huge contributor to all of this is communication with the person who you're courting. Because for Max and me, when we first started dating, we were a little bit like, okay, where's the line? What are we like? What? But the thing is we had a hard conversation like sex is for marriage. What is the hard line? One of us has to stay accountable, etc. Because there are going to be moments where you guys are going to want to go further, but there needs to be one of you who is like, oh, wait, hold up, to hold you back. And, we never, luckily, we never got into a situation like that. But I know for a fact that had we, one of us would have been like, oh, too far, and then we hold each other accountable, or actually, I can think of like maybe one time when that happened and we might have just kissed a little too much type thing. I wouldn't have considered it making out, but then we held each other accountable. We both went to confession and we were like, oh, this is good. Like we're on the same page here. And I think that really comes down to communication. And a lot of people, a lot of couples are afraid of communicating. And it's like, no, if you can't communicate with your spouse, they're not marriage material.
Definitely. And that's why, like in this book too, I'm not writing this as an expert. I actually didn't follow most of this stuff. I mean, by God's grace, my wife and I were a virgin, but I can't say, that there's so many things like I look back and it's like, man, I could have done it so much better. I could have taken a strong, because it is, especially, when you're dating, especially in courting, it's like when that person is, you can tell when they're fertile, they're just glowing. It's like,
Mhm.
and it's, and I had some friends too that one of the holiest couples, very beautiful couple, and they ended up getting pregnant before their marriage. And it's like, it can happen to anyone. The moment you think like, oh, it's never going to happen to me,
Yep.
I mean, we realize how weak we are, we need God's grace. So I think like that communication that right now, because it's going to be, like the way you and your fiance can communicate now, it's like it only sets it up better for your marriage, because there's times in marriage, like, he's going to want sex, as men, like we want it more. And so, and you're like, no, I'm not feeling, I'm like, I'm sick, or, I'm just, and so those are important, that he can respect you, and you guys can communicate now, because it's so important.
Exactly. And I definitely think that when it comes down to it, honesty, communication, those are the foundations for a healthy relationship. And when you first get into courting, obviously it's going to be a little bit awkward. You're not going to know how their demeanor is, so you're probably, or hopefully you're friends first, because in my opinion, I think being friends first is ideal, but that's not how it always happens. But I feel like sometimes you have to feel them out a couple times just to figure out, okay, what's their sense of humor? How do they take difficult situations? Like, are they okay having hard conversations right now? And I think it also depends on your age range. If you're a little older, you probably want to get those conversations out of the way a lot faster so you're not wasting your time. If you're a little bit younger, maybe you go on like 5 or 6 dates before you figure it out, really. But just know that it's like dating is not a commitment. Courtship is, and I don't know how you would really say it, but I'd say go on like a couple dates first, nothing super serious, and then if they ask you to be their boyfriend or girlfriend, then that's like commitment. I don't What would you say about
Yeah,
that?
yeah, and that's what Father Rippinger, in the first stage of courtship, and I'm going to pull it up in my book, but it's the friendship stage, and that's what my wife and I did too. It's like we just, so it's 3 to 6 months, and it's a period of getting to know someone with no physical affection. This occurs in a group setting, and you determine whether that person has virtue. And I love that period, because it was like I wasn't trying to, like, what are we, boyfriend or girlfriend? Am I pursuing you? I just, like, you got to know that person, and there was no pressure, and I felt like that. I think a lot of people jump second date. It's like, oh, we're dating. It's like, just get to know that person.
Mm,
Like, just, do you like being around them? And then you go dive in after that 3 to 6 months. It's like, then you're really okay. Then you ask the father's permission to court the daughter. That's, again, and I think what Father Rippinger says, no physical affection, because I think really the affection during that time period, it can blur our, like, imagine on your first date, you're just like making out with that person. Of course, you're going to want to see them the second time, even the girl, but you're like, this guy's like he's a dirt bag, but yet, like, oh, I like the way he kisses me, or the way he, I don't like being alone. But so again, I think it can, obviously we can be blinded you know, by emotional chat, being emotionally chased with someone, or I say emotionally unchased with someone.
there you
And
go.
yeah, and so I think these are just like, they're just a prudence of that. I think so many people miss that friendship stage, and I highly recommend it. Like, so.
Yeah, I definitely think for Max and me. Obviously, Max didn't ask my dad to date me because they didn't end up meeting him until later. But we met in a group setting. We met at my local church. He recognized me from my ministry. And usually, when that happens, not that I don't mind it, but usually the guys act a little bit weird. They try to pretend they don't know me, but then they try to like be like, "Oh, but you look so familiar," and like, "Oh, are you dating anyone?" Tee hee hee. So when Max did it, he's just like, "Oh, you're blah 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 from your ministry." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he didn't shake my hand, he didn't want to hug, he didn't really want anything. He's like, "Well, I love what you do." And I'm like, "Okay, like cool, whatever." Like, "Okay, cool." And then the whole night I just gravitated towards him. I don't know how to explain that. It wasn't like a, oh, maybe like I kind of like him. No, I just gravitated towards him. I wanted to be around him because he had something special, and we both had very similar senses of humor. And then later on, we started dating, but we were friends for a good few months first. We met in July, and then we started dating in November. So we got time alone together a lot, and not like bad time. We just drank coffee and sat in his basement and watched SpongeBob with his brother or his friends. And we really got to know each other that way. But then there were like 2 nights I can think of closer to when we started getting dating, started to, date or court or whatever you want to call it. And we were up until like 4 a.m., but it wasn't physical. And obviously, probably wasn't the most prudent thing, but it wasn't like a physical, like, oh, I want to, it was more like, oh, we're having these really deep conversations, and we just lost track of time. And then that's when we realized, like, oh my gosh, like we are really compatible. Why aren't we dating? And then that's when we started dating. And so being friends first really helped us
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot.
No, I see it. It's like, this discernment period. It's like God just, and he changed. It's like you almost have to, it's like he puts these desires on your heart, but then they're like slowly fulfilled over time. Like when we're
Yes.
not trying to, and that's the whole difference, I think, between courtship and dating is dating. It's like you're trying to grasp, trying to get something from someone. But courtship is like, what can I give to that person, as a gift, and not trying to take from them. And God's like, I want to present this girl as a gift to you. Like, this is my beloved daughter for you. I
Hmm.
think Jason Everett had a great quote. I think he was talking about like the day that he saw his wife come down the aisle, and it was like he could almost see like God the Father bringing his daughter to him. And I think, and that's so beautiful about it's like there wasn't, the devil tries to get in there with, obviously with impure thoughts and anxiety, and it's really, it just naturally unfolds if when we're
Yeah.
doing God, when we're living in God's will and his peace. It's like if it's meant to be, and if it's not, like your heart is not going to be damaged, like because you weren't physically affectionate. Like you should leave each other as like saints. Like if almost in a sense like that person made you better, and you could go to your wife, your future wife, someday and say like, I was grateful for that relationship because it made me better instead of like damaging me. And like, with the dating culture, it's like, I can't imagine, the men that, that have slept around before they're married. It's like, God forbid, maybe God will heal them of that. But it's like, you consummate your marriage with your wife. It's like, I'm sure the devil's going to come after you during that most intimate act. Those thoughts of those other women are going to come around, just with, obviously with pornography too. It's like
Hmm.
these things damage us, and it's like we have to pray for healing. But I think that's why courtship, it just keeps the relationship pure and it in line with God's will.
Yes, so true. And I definitely think one of the major things that really stood out about Max was in previous relationships, I dated guys who were addicted to pornography. Without knowing it, I thought they quit, but they didn't. So I was very used to being sexualized on a daily basis. And it became so normal to me that when Max didn't do that, it was almost like a little like, oh, this is what a godly relationship is like, and we could be together, and I'm not afraid that he's going to want to make out or have sex with me or pressure me or try and sexualize me in some way. It was literally a genuine, like, if he said I looked beautiful, it was genuine. It wasn't like, "Oh, you look sexy today." It was, the kind of gross, like, you just feel your gut just kind of coil and like disgust. You're like,
Yeah.
"Oh," because you know that that's not, holy, that that's not a good thing, really. And I mean, when you're married, you can say that all you want, whatever. But when you want to be viewed for your purity, and you want
Yeah.
to be viewed for your personality, not how your body looks and stuff. You want to be attractive, of course, but you don't want that to be the sole focus. And for me in past relationships, that was the sole focus, was how flat my stomach was, how this was, how that was. And it really caused body dysmorphia, it caused eating disorders, it
Yeah.
caused a huge issue. And all of those issues have been healed since, being engaged and dating and being with Max, because he's not like that. And it's so important for women to find a man like that.
It is. No, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so true. Even, when Max is setting up your marriage, because it's, even for men, like I noticed at times, like, when I'm not like cuddling with my wife or showing other affection, like if I just like straight up want sex without giving the other things to her, it's like I'm, in a sense, there's this, even John Paul talks about, even men in marriage, like we can commit adultery, we can lust after our own spouse. And I shared that once with a Protestant guy outside of an abortion clinic, and he was like, no, you can't do that. No, it is possible to just, it's like you just want your wife, just desire her wife for the sexual act. And instead of like giving your wife that affection that she needs. So definitely, I think about it too. It's like, I want to be the gaze, if we look at the Eucharist and how Jesus gazes upon us from the Eucharist, and, as spouse, as men, we're supposed to love our wife as Christ loves the church. It's like, I should, like when you see Max or when my wife sees me, it should be the eyes of Christ, like gazing
Mhm.
upon her in the same way. Like when I've looked in my wife's eyes, it's like, I see God like loving me and all my imperfections. So it's such a beautiful thing, that you shared. So,
Yeah, I definitely think that these days people need to have that wake up call because they think, "Oh, this vice or this addiction I have, it'll go away once I'm married because then I'll have my wife who will give me everything." No. No. Red flag. Sirens should be like blaring in the background. That's not how it works. Issues are magnified in marriage because they are meant to pull out the worst part of you so that your spouse can get you to heaven. Like it's meant to really shape you up to get to heaven. It's not an easy thing. You don't just boom, everything's perfect. No, so many things happen and you have to be prepared for that and you have to have the conversations. And I feel like you're better prepared for marriage when you ask yourself these questions for courting and when the ones in the book you had quite a few of them and when you're having this process of courtship as opposed to oh let's have sex outside of marriage, oh let's do all these things that are reserved for marriage, so then when you actually get married there's nothing special about it. It's just like, oh, I already feel like I've been married to this person for forever, and it's just like that's not how it should be.
yeah.
That's not the point.
Yeah. No, it breaks my heart when I see people like, cohabitating and they wake up the next day. It's like, what, like what changed? It's like, and then
Exactly.
they get tired of that person and I think about it too, like I compare, and I wrote an article on this, but not, I mean, it is tarnished in a sense, but even myself, being, when I was like 5 years old, I remember playing in the woods and, there's a guy there's pornography. It's like, we live in this porn culture. And it's like,
Mhm.
I look at my son, it's like, I want him on his wedding day. I mean, the ideal would be for him to see, he'd never seen, like, obviously outside of his mom, but like another naked woman. I mean, it's just like to
Yep.
imagine seeing that, like that beauty. And it really, it's a glimpse. Like I had that longing for my wedding night. It was basically, I felt it was this longing to see the beatific vision. Like when you unveil yourself and your fiance's name's Max, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. Like when you unveil yourself for him for the whole time, it's like he is getting a glimpse of the beatific vision. And I don't know how to explain it. And that's what I think, what we forget about, like to showing that beauty that's worth waiting, worth dying for, and so it's just something that, anyways, I think could be something for us men to ponder, like every decision we make, like even our high school kids, like when you say no to porn, you're saying yes to your future wife. You're saying yes to your wedding night and all those other nights that will follow that.
Yes. No, it's so true. And I think, especially these days, courting, a lot of people think it's scary, because guys are afraid of rejection. We kind of touched about that a little bit earlier. But it's like rejection, it might be kind of blunt, but guys have to get over it. Like, it's gonna happen. It's better for you to get used to rejection and how to handle it properly in a good way than it is for you to avoid it. And then when it happens, it destroys your world. Like, you have to get used to rejection. And women, a lot of the times, they don't want to reject a guy because well, for starters, there's a lot of safety issues involved with that these days. But also, sometimes they just feel bad, but then it gets them in a trickier situation. So, for men and women, what would you suggest are some things to discern courtship with a person? Like if they want to, what should they be doing?
Yeah. Well, I say in terms of courtship, I mean, I highlight on some of these virtues too. And one thing that I give a talk on, I don't really mention as much in here, but it's like, how well, like, does that person handle suffering? And it's tough because you're not in a lot of situations where they're disappointment, but you can just see overall, like, is this, I'm guilty of this. But like complaining all the time and just like everything that goes bad to them and like, oh, complaining or, I mean, you want to, again, find someone like, how do you handle suffering? And I think too, another point is humility, which is so difficult. It's one of the greatest virtues. The saints say it's the greatest. And like, when just, does this person like apologize to you? Like, or are they always right? And are they bossing you around? And like, they don't even, obviously when they make mistakes saying, hey, like, I'm sorry for offending you. And like you touched on it too, like purity, as we know, like if this guy's addicted to porn, I mean, people, even Jason Ever, and I agree with it. Like, you really shouldn't be entering a courtship if there's any addiction to pornography. They need to get right. Maybe you can be friends with them and say, when you're completely free from that, because then I want you, because right now you're not free to love me. So those are a few, I think, some of the few points, the virtues definitely looking at, and so,
Yeah, no, I agree. And I definitely think in general, if you have any kind of addiction, whether it's alcohol, pornography, masturbation, like there's a bunch of different nicotine, even
yeah,
because nicotine can make you very irritable and very snappy if you don't have it. Those you need to eradicate addictions from your life. That doesn't mean you can't have a cigar once in a while with a celebration, or you can't have a glass of wine with your friends once in a while. It means if you are specifically relying on something to get through the day and it's unhealthy and it's causing these vices and these issues, and addictions are mortal sins, alcoholism, getting drunk is a mortal sin, and all of these things, you need to go to confession and maybe even seek counseling if it's that bad. But we should not be pulling another person into our messy addictions. We should fix ourselves and want to be better, because if we are relying on somebody else to pull us out of our addictions, it's never going to stick. We have to do it for ourselves. We have to do it for God. If we do it for anybody else, it's not going to be a long-term thing. We're going to fall back in.
yeah. Yeah, and I was going to add too, is how much do they love the Catholic faith? Because you hear this missionary dating, like, hey, I'm going to bring them into the faith. But I mean, I have
Mm,
a really dear friend of mine, and his wife, I mean, God bless her, she comes to mass with them every Sunday, and he's been praying for, I think, over, I don't know how many years, 12 or 13 years. She comes into the
wow.
faith. They raise their kids in the faith. So I mean, she's better than most. But I mean, other friends, like, they're married to women that, I had a cousin married a Muslim lady, and it's been difficult, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, that's why I say, like, find a Catholic woman that loves the faith and that prays with you too. Like, are they just marrying you because they're being Catholic because they want to please you? But no, like, are they open? Do they want to pray the rosary with you? Like, do they engage in, some kind of mental prayer? It's not like you have to meet someone that goes to daily mass. I mean, that is helpful, but like, no, that they're normal. They love their faith, and they're balanced too, because we can go in these extremes with Catholicism where it's like you could even, it's like, oh, I got to watch like EWTN for 3 hours every day, and, or even someone too, that's like, I don't know. It's just finding this Catholicism that's beautiful, that's true and good. And, but above all, that this person loves God. I think that they love God even more than you,
Mm.
and those are some important things that I found by reading these saints, like how much they love God.
Absolutely. And I think that it's so important to get those examples because a lot of people don't understand what it's supposed to look like. And there's some questions that you guys put in here for what, courtship looks like, and some questions to ask, like, does the person have virtue? That's the one we kind of touched on. Is this person best person to lead me and, God willing, my future children to heaven? That is so important, just like what you were talking about, because mixed marriages when it comes to religion is very difficult, because I have seen it and I've seen some very rare instances where it works out, but for the majority it doesn't. And it creates confusion. The kids are usually really confused, especially if it's the dad who's not Catholic and the mom who is. If the mom is the one who's leading the Catholic faith and teaching the kids only and the dad isn't involved, I think it's like 70% of kids whose dad aren't involved in the faith fall away. It's a huge percentage. It's like, if you want to raise your kids Catholic, ladies, you have to find a strong Catholic man who's willing to raise the kids Catholic and who is strong in his own faith, who can lead you to heaven. So important. And then, the other questions, like, does this person have what it takes spiritually, emotionally, and financially? Does he attend mass every Sunday because it's a mortal sin not to? Does he pray daily? Does he go to confession regularly? Growing up, I loved my parents, but growing up, I only saw my dad go to confession once, maybe. Really impacted my life. I didn't see him pray. My mom always prayed the rosary with us, but I never saw him pray. He never really went to anything but Sunday mass with us. And then when I was around 11, we just stopped going altogether. And because of that, I fell away from my faith because I was a daddy's girl. Anything my dad did, I did. Anything he liked, I liked. And so when I saw him not take it that seriously, I also didn't take it that seriously. And I think, when you're looking for a spouse, you really have to keep in mind you're also looking for your future kid's dad or mom.
And you want to make sure that I had one person comment on this, like, during courtship too, it's like one of the questions is, does the man lead? Now that doesn't mean like at any point during that courtship process, like a woman can break off the courtship. It's not like you're bound. I mean, they do say, there's this beautiful ceremony. I didn't know about it, but the betrothal ceremony. And I
Yeah,
don't know
we
if,
had that done.
yeah, I didn't even know about that. But it's like, then that's kind of, it's very serious. Obviously, I think there's still circumstances where you can break it off, but it's like, no, you're taking that next step. And I think all of these stages, like as you're analyzing or not analyzing, but discerning, like, is this the best man to lead my children? Because if it's not, like if this man is like making you be the leader and he's not taking his prayer life serious, like what, he's not going to just automatically change. You're not going to be, and I think about it too, is like, Saint Monica, I mean, she married a guy, I think his name was Patricius, but I think he was a pagan. And I mean, he was converted, but like, I mean, I don't know how many women want to spend like 17 years of their life just praying every day for their spouse. And I think had Augustine's father been Catholic, from the beginning, I mean, you think about it, it's like, well, he came back to the faith, but do you know how many more souls Augustine could have saved in his
Mhm.
lifetime? That because of those 17 years that he was wandering, it's like we have to think about that. Like, every moment, every year, like it counts, in our conversion. And so I think that, again, finding someone, and even for women too, it's like, obviously it's important. Like they want to join the faith. Like if Max was like, he's like, I'm going to become Catholic, doing RCIA right now with you. And, that's important, but it's like, is he doing it again, just to please you? Or is he doing it because like he loves the faith? And those are questions we have to ask ourselves.
Exactly. And I had so many friends whose spouses converted for them, and now neither of them are practicing. And it's just so hard to watch that happen and to see how it really does affect yourself. And women always tell me, they're like, "Well, I can do it. Like my husband's not Catholic. Why are marriage is already difficult? Why are you making it more difficult? Why? Just why? You love this person, but they're not capable of loving you. So why are you sticking your neck out for this person consistently when you deserve a spouse who, loves God just as much as you do?" And again, in rare circumstances, it does work out. Very rare though. And
Yeah.
usually that spouse is the woman who's not Catholic and she ends up converting eventually. But if the dad is not Catholic, if the man is not Catholic, more than likely the woman's going to fall away from her faith as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's like, I believe, the, like almost, I mean, Don Bosco had that dream, right? With the two pillars, the rosary and the Eucharist. But I believe with confession, I think those three pillars, if you have the Eucharist, the rosary and confession, all three in your marriage, like in your spouse, like prizes those above everything. Like I don't know, I would be shocked if you'd ever get divorced if those were the three pillars, because those, like, and you have God as the center, you have Our Lady, and you have
Mhm.
confession. Like, I mean, those are the things that I think will keep your marriage, and those are the three things I think that you should look for as you're discerning a future spouse. Like, how much do they prize those?
Exactly. No, for sure. And I just think it's really good that we had this conversation because now more people know about this book. And for those who want to go get the book, it's called Courtship of the Saints: How the Saints Met Their Spouse by Patrick O'Hearn. It's on Tan Books, and you can use my promo code Amber15 at checkout. But thank you so much, Patrick, for being on here. Where can people reach you, or if they want to have you give a talk or anything like that, what can they do?
Yeah, so my website is Patrick, and then my middle initial R, and then O'Hearn, OHEARN.com. And so you can contact me there. And I'm also on Instagram, Patrick R. O'Hearn. And again, I want to thank you, Amber, for having me on. And I know we're kind of touching more on the themes of courtship, but the stories in this book, especially there's some with Padre Pio introduced couples. I really want people that read this book to realize like how much heaven longs for your vocation to call upon Saint Raphael and all these saints mentioned in this book. They just have a great desire to intercede for you. So again, thank you for having me on and talking about the saints and courtship and dating.
Absolutely. And I definitely think even for those who are married or who are engaged right now or aren't in this specific, beginning process of courtship, this book will still help you. I think it's really helpful to kind of put in perspective if you're struggling in marriage or your engagement or something, to really look at the lives of these saints and figure out, okay, you know, this is the example, this is what I need to do, and to have that example, because I don't think a lot of us have that. So whether you're single, you're courting, you're engaged, or you're married, this book is great. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us and also writing this book. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. And with all of that being said, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and you learned something. You guys can email me at thereligioushippie@gmail.com, and I'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye, guys. Do you have questions or comments about today's episode? Email me at thereligioushippie@gmail.com or leave a voice message at anchor.fm/thereligioushippie. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Amber Rose and distributed by Metacortext Publishing. This podcast is copyright by The Religious Hippie, NFP. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for The Religious Hippie at thereligioushippie.com or find me on social media for other unique content. Thank you.